folks. Welcome to Dad Devotionals. As you can see, if you're watching from video, yes, I am outside. It is finally a beautiful day here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. But we're here to speak with my special guest today, Deacon Sean Reid. He's serving in the Canadian Archdiocese of the Orthodox Church in America. He's also president and head coach at Arrowhead Coaching and Facilitation Solutions, and you'll also probably recognize him from the Saint Emmelia Homeschool Podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. Deacon Sean, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to Dad Devotionals. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
No problem at all. Let's start with this one. I always like to ask the guests to come on, whether you're Abbot Trifon or Deacon Sean Reid, what was your journey to Orthodoxy? Can you tell us about it?
Okay. Well, I was raised Anglican or Episcopal in the U.S. And so, always kind of went to church. And then in university, I kind of walked away from my Christian faith for a while, and then came out of university and kind of realized that was missing, and found my way back to a local Anglican church where I ended up meeting my wife. We were living in Ottawa, Canada at the time. And then so we stayed in that church, kind of an evangelical Anglican church, for a while. And then I moved, actually about 10 years ago, we moved down to closer to the Hamilton, Ontario region, about 45 minutes north of Buffalo for your American listeners. And when we moved here, we couldn't find an Anglican church that really kind of fit with our theological beliefs and our kind of principles that was anywhere near us. And so we started church shopping around, and in that process we started asking ourselves, what do we believe? We were at a Reformed church for a while, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't care. I just wanted to settle down, find a place to be. And it was my wife that actually really cared about, what are we settling into? And so I was up there. I was leading, I led the music team at this church, and I'd done that for a while in our previous church. And I was getting settled in, and my wife was sitting in the pews and just not happy. And she's like, this just does not feel comfortable. And eventually the pastor of the church came by and said, hey, you guys have been here for a while. Maybe you want to start, sign a membership. Well, what's involved with that? Well, you got to get up in front of the church and say a statement of faith. You got to read the Heidelberg Catechism and say you believe in all these Calvinist doctrines. And I was still like, oh, sure, why not? And my wife was like, no. But in that process, she said, we went through this exchange of, well, what do we really believe? And one thing led to another. One night we Googled, she had remembered that she had an Orthodox friend growing up who had all great answers to all these questions she had. We Googled Orthodox English, Hamilton, which is the area we were. We found a local parish where we started to go to Vespers on Saturday night. We'd stick around. The priest would talk to us. We'd get these great answers to all these questions we have. We sit up late at night and wrestle with these things. And eventually we ran out of good questions and decided that we didn't have good answers to from the church. And that was enough for us. And we were received into the church after that. So it was, in a way, it was, I think we've always had a strong Christian faith, but this was a chance to really get some clarity around, well, what was at the root of our faith? What did we really believe? And thank God we found our way into the church.
Amen. And obviously you did get that clarity of faith, because here you are. I think you converted in about 2010, if my research was correct. Yep. Here we are, exactly. 10 years later. You became a deacon. Tell us how that all took place.
It's interesting because it's related to my work as well. I was thinking about this not long ago. For my entire life, I have helped leaders lead in some capacity or another. So that is true in my church life and in my volunteering in the community, and certainly true in my career. I started in politics. I was working for a cabinet minister here in Canada, and then I worked with the CEO of a software company for about 10 years, and then I worked with CEOs of construction companies. And so that's just been, and I mean, man, I even as a kid, my brothers would call me the third parent because I was always telling my parents how to keep us in line. So
Love that.
I have always been helping leaders lead, and so when we made our way into the church, we were just active for a while as participants, and then eventually I kind of put my hand up and offered to be a reader, 3 years in, and at some point I just, I wanted to help our priest a little bit more if I could, and I asked him about, enrolling in the OCA's diaconal vocations program, and he gave me his blessing to do that, and the Archbishop gave his blessing for me to do that. And it's just kind of been that path of just seeing a need, seeing a leader who needs some help, and putting up my hand and saying, how can I help? And God's kind of just given me something to do every time I've asked that question. So that's how I kind of made my way into the diaconate.
Well, I can appreciate that. And clearly leadership suits you. I mean, and now you're going out there, you're coaching businesses, you're coaching leaders. So can you
Mhm.
tell us about the genesis of Arrowhead, and, why did you start it, and what's your primary goal?
Yeah, well, really, in many ways, Arrowhead is just the manifestation of doing what I've always done. As I said, it's really just about helping leaders lead. Now, it took me a while to figure that out, because when I first started the company, I kind of started as a side hustle, as a side project last year. And I just wanted to help people. Really, I loved coaching, and I'd always had a coach, I'd always had mentors. I'd mentored others in my work life and coached others informally in different capacities. And I just loved doing that. I just wanted to help people. But that was actually, turning that desire to help people into an actual business that you could build, turn into something, is a different story. And so
Absolutely.
that took some discernment in it. And it was only when I looked back on my trajectory of my career and I saw that common thread of helping leaders lead that I realized that's what I'm about. And that's what I should build this business about. And so that's what I did. And I just, said, we're going to be a leadership coaching and consulting company. We're going to help leaders and chief executives and leaders of organizations build the organizations they were meant to build. And we do that by helping them engage their people as effectively as possible and help them align their leadership teams around a common set of objectives and goals, and help them develop that next generation of leadership talent and capacity in their organization so they can keep moving the organization forward. So, it's been, I wouldn't say it just sort of came out of the blue, but as I looked back over that trajectory of my life, I saw that thread, and it kind of became almost inevitable conclusion that this is the kind of company I had to create.
Absolutely. Well, with you, and specifically speaking as a leader, we've covered the faith aspect, we've covered the business and your career, and as men, we're also called to be leaders in the home, right? So how have you
Mm.
been able to manage and juggle all these things while also being a father and husband and doing it effectively?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that is that is absolutely true. We are called to that leadership role, but we also, I think, kind of construe certain ideas of what that looks like, and we can box ourselves into this almost a stereotype, quite frankly, of what we think that should look like, especially those of us who come out of I'd say a more conservative Christian background. We kind of have this idea that the father and husband is the guy with all the answers, is the guy who makes all the decisions, is this fearless superhero. And I posted about this not long ago, actually, and I think I think that leadership takes a whole lot of different forms. Sometimes you absolutely do need to be that convicted, clear thinking, heroic, in the sense of just being decisive and ready to take that step that doesn't look super comfortable, but is a step you need to take. But there's other times where, it's okay as the leader to be vulnerable, to rely on each other, I certainly rely heavily on my wife and my kids increasingly as they're growing up, and we're a team, and we my job as the leader of that team is really just to recognize my own weaknesses, my own limitations, and cultivate out of every one of us a harmony and ability to kind of all contribute and keep doing what we're trying to do as faithful Orthodox Christians in an Orthodox Christian family.
I'm so glad you said that, and especially at a time like this, I feel like the chance to be vulnerable is compounded almost, because I feel like, especially for me, I've had to, in trying to adapt to this coronavirus and working from home, and everyone just being on top of each other. It's some of my vices have come out, particularly my anger,
Mm-hmm.
in many
Sure.
ways. So, what is something that you've struggled with as a father for as long as you've been a dad, and what encouragement can you offer for other guys, dealing with that same situation?
Well, I've struggled with anger, for sure. I've
Amen.
struggled with, what haven't I struggled with really? But, one of the things I think just building off of what we just talked about a minute ago, I think one of the things I have struggled with over the years is my identity in the home. What does it mean to be a leader in this household? And what does strength really mean? And and what does that look like in the context of parenting and in the context of being a husband? And where have I got some kind of beliefs about that, preconceived notions of what that is that might not actually be either accurate or helpful? So, the first thing I would say for all of us men in the family is, before you go and do anything, you know, carve out a little bit more time in your life for some reflection and some self-awareness and some asking yourself some, questions. I mean, Plato wasn't orthodox, but the unexamined life is not worth living, right?
Amen.
That's
Yeah.
that's true, and that's what we call, in the Orthodox context, watchfulness is all about that. That wonderful ascetical practice of watchfulness, where we're just looking at ourselves and looking at what's coming, what's going on inside of us, and you know, um, that unseen warfare, to use that, draw on that other fantastic work. But I think the first place to start for us men is actually to stop and actually just look inside a little bit. We're blessed with the sacrament of confession, in the Orthodox Church. Um, but that doesn't, just because, right now, some of us, it's hard to go to confession, right now. But it doesn't mean we can't do that whole reflective and repentant exercise in our lives every day. So I think that's number one. Take a look at ourselves. And then the number 2 point is that I emphasize a lot, and this is true with, the book some of your listeners will be familiar with, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, by
Yeah,
Saint,
absolutely.
Elder Thaddeus, the Serbian elder. Wonderful book. And the root of that notion is the sense, the truth, that we actually can control our thoughts. We have it within our capacity as human beings to control what we think about and what we discard as an unhelpful thought, and how we respond to those thoughts as we go. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of discipline. It's not something you just sort of snap your fingers and become effective at. But once we become aware, first of all, of what's going on inside of us and those thoughts we're having, then we can decide and consciously choose, you know, is it really helpful for me right now to be wanting to really lash out at my 12-year-old? Like, is that really the helpful thing for me to be thinking about right now?
Absolutely.
So before I just impulsively do that, take a moment and actually think, what is the helpful response in this situation? I cannot control what my 12-year-old chose to do in that moment, but I can control how I respond. And I think that's at the essence of what Elder Thaddeus is talking about when he talks about our thoughts determine our lives. Our thoughts determine what comes next. And so if we take control of that thought in response to whatever our 12-year-old just did, things will go a lot more smoothly.
Absolutely. And I think, especially at a time right now where many of us are, whether we want to or not, kind of pushed into that homeschooling and that teacher role, having that patience and that presence of mind and being more proactive in our response maybe than reactive. Why don't you just tell us about your experience homeschooling, and then also, intertwine that with the work you do with Saint Emmelia?
Yeah, so we homeschooled for quite a number of years, and of course now we're homeschooling again. Our kids are a little bit more grown up, so they actually are both in. This year they were both in school, although we're still very much advocates of homeschooling, which is why I still lead that podcast, Saint Emmelia podcast on ancient faith. And quite honestly, we've rediscovered the benefits as we've been back in this homeschooling environment. We've just rediscovered a lot of the joy and treasure that comes in homeschooling. So it'll be interesting to see how things unfold for us, moving forward. But I think one of the things that I reflect on in our homeschooling that we had to learn over time. And this applies, by the way, whether you homeschool or not. So one of my favorite authors is Dr. Philip Mamalakis, and he's written this book, Parenting Toward the Kingdom. And in that book, one of the root ideas that he talks about is being attentive. There's that word again, that watchfulness, that attentiveness, in this case, attending to our kids. And so before we respond to our kids with some action when we see them doing something, before we lash out or impulsively react to something, first check in with them and say, what's going on? What are you up to? What's going on? What are you trying to do in that moment? What are you accomplishing? What do you think's going on for you in that moment? And in doing that, you create this connection with them, out of which they become much more responsive to whatever you have to say in the future. But also you become a lot more attentive to picking your words and choosing and framing your response more effectively in a way that's really going to kind of use that well-known expression, meet them where they're at, and kind of you're gonna pick the right tool to use in that moment. You're not, because you've checked in and you've kind of attended to what's going on there, and you've taken a closer look before you've kind of taken that blunt instrument and dealt with it. So, I think that's one of the things that we've really learned is how to in homeschooling, we have that opportunity more than we might if we were sending our kids to school for 40 hours a week. We have that opportunity to just be really attentive to them and really check in with them and really understand what's going on for them. And in so doing, we become a lot more effective in terms of helping them learn to grow into be the adults that God intends for them to be.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you brought up Dr. Philip Mamalakis. Folks, you can check out episode 22 with my interview with Dr. Mamalakis as well. And we touch on some of the points that Sean just brought up. And, as you were speaking, Sean, I was reminded of, when we begin Divine Liturgy, or right before the reading or the gospel, the priest says, "Let us attend." And, I imagine it's the same concept. We're supposed to be focused. We're supposed to be receptive. We're supposed to be, all eyes on the reader, all eyes on the Divine Liturgy, making sure that we're, bringing in all the divine blessings and the divine goodness that the service and the readings offer. So I appreciate you bringing that up. One of my last questions for you is, what are some final words of wisdom that you'd like to offer the dads, the husbands out there who are listening?
I think that's a great point that we should just underscore is attend. If we could just, as dads, work on attending in life. So attending in our, attending what's going on inside of us in our work lives right now, especially right now, in our family lives, attending to what's going on in our homes, and attending what's going on in prayer. I don't want to give too much spiritual advice or whatever, but I, one of the things that I have learned is when we pray, before we can even kind of intellectually engage with the words or what's going on in the church service, and there's, rightly so, there's a lot of emphasis on, our clergy put a lot of emphasis on what's in the words of the liturgy and all that sort of thing. Before we can intellectually engage and unpack any of that, we first have to learn how to actually just listen, how to actually just clear out all of the other stuff in our heads that's going on while we're in a prayer, in a service, in a divine service, and actually just attend, as we just talked about. So if we can just practice in our own personal lives, in those quiet moments in our personal lives, in our work, in our households, our family lives, and in our prayer, if we can just practice attending, that's the foundation upon which everything else grows. So that would be my one point, is let's all work on that call to action of let us attend.
Oh, no, I love that. I mean, I know in even some of the prayer books that I have, it says just that, you're standing before God, and it's like, act like it. So just, you calm yourself, put away the cell phone, put away all the other distractions, and just be present. I think that's beautiful.
Right.
Thank you. Well, look, Deacon, this has been amazing. I thank you so much for this. How can we connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, my website is arrowheadcoaching.ca. That's the website for my company. You can also check out the Saint Emmelia podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. And I'm also available on all the social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So you can find me, but go to my website, arrowheadcoaching.ca. You'll see I got a blog there with a whole bunch of the insights that I talked about today there. And people can definitely, hopefully people find some benefit from it.
Absolutely. Well, I know I have, and just checking it out and following you on Facebook. So I'll be sure to link all that up in the show notes, guys, for you to check out what Deacon Sean's doing and connect with him as well over there. Deacon Sean, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having you back on the Dad Devotionals podcast in the near future.
Thanks, David. Great time.
Thank you.